Barukot habaot, ladies, and welcome to another edition of our weekly Torah classes. And whether you're logging on to Torah Anytime or ohelsara.com, or in this case, if you're logging on and Zooming with us, we really appreciate your support. We appreciate your dedication to Torah and to your neshama. And Bezat Hashem, we hope that these shiurim are creating for you tremendous emotional and spiritual support, and that they're going to give you the ability to rise mechayil el chayil Bezat Hashem. This shiur is dedicated to the father-in-law of someone we know and love, Mira, who does so much for Ohel Sarah, is always involved in the events that we do in Brooklyn. Her father-in-law's Yartzeit, Ben Tzion Ben Shifra alav shalom. Her uncle's Yartzeit, Manash Ben Tzipora alav shalom, and her great-grandfather Shaul Ben Tzipora alav shalom. We hope that they are Melitzei Yosher and Shamayim, and that they have an Aliyat Neshama, and that they should beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu to bring the Mashiach soon. We're also dedicating this shiur to Ruti Davis's friend's father, who was nifter just, I believe it was last week, David Ben Israel Aaron, alav shalom. He too should be a melitz yosher for all of Klal Yisrael, shava aliyat neshama. And also for the refuah shlema of Shira Bat Devoralea, for the Ilui Neshama of Jafri Avraham Ben Yehuda, for Susie Tzin's brother, someone who died very young, sadly, Ephraim Volva Ben Avraham Yaakov, alav shalom, and for Susie, our donor, who always donates whenever there's some kind of campaign for Ohel Sarah. She's always there for us. Bluma Zissel Bat Devora, she should have tremendous hatzlacha and beracha. And to all of Klal Yisrael, to you, that you should have tremendous yeshuot and nechamot. We are now in Eretz Yisrael, in Bet Shemesh. It's now, I believe, almost 2:10 in the morning. And it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is an incredible thing, in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which means that in just 2 weeks from now, we're going to be celebrating Chag Pesach. The Jewish Chagim are filled with a lot of meaning, which is why we have to prepare for them spiritually and not just physically. Hence the reason for this shiur. The Torah HaKadosha calls this Chag HaMatzot. And we see many restrictions on the subject of Chametz. The Torah HaKadosha warns us to rid the house of any leavened bread, to remove the Chametz from our homes. And interestingly, we don't find this command by any other mitzvah. For example, if you have a piece of meat in your house that is taref, there's no law that states that you have to get rid of that piece of meat. You can't eat it, but you're not told to remove it, from your house. There's no such thing as bdikat taref. There's no such thing as biur taref. You don't have to take that meat and burn it. But when it comes to chametz, before Pesach, we have to clean the entire house. We have to gather the chametz, remove it from the house. We have to even burn it in a fire. And if we didn't search for the chametz and left it in the house, the punishment is very severe. Karet. Karet is the biblical penalty for very grave offenses. It literally means that one's neshama is severed from the nation. It's like a spiritual death of some kind. Now that's a very stringent punishment if you think about it, because if a drop of milk falls into a huge pot of chicken soup, compared to the largeness of the pot, that drop is considered batel b'shishim, and you could still eat from that soup. But when it comes to chametz, the halacha says that even be'elef lo matir, even if 1,000th of a drop of chametz fell into a pot of soup, you cannot eat the soup. So notice how stringent the Torah is about the prohibition of eating chametz on Pesach. Question is, why? Why? Is there a message that the Torah wants us to learn that lies behind this mitzvah of getting rid of the chametz? First of all, the one thing we notice is that the ingredients of chametz and matzah are basically the same: flour and water. If the ingredients are the same, what's the difference between these two? Well, when matzah is being made, there's a stopwatch. The entire process from beginning to end, including the baking, has to be done within an 18-minute time span, which means that everybody in the matzah bakery is actively rushing and moving and doing in order to see to it that that dough does not rise and become chametz. But with chametz, after the ingredients are put into the bowl and kneaded, you set the bowl aside and you wait for the dough to rise. So the basic difference between chametz and matzah is that matzah represents action and movement and doing, while chametz represents atzlut, the passive, lazy, and inactive side of a person. So what then is the message of chametz and matzah? Okay. Ladies, in life, Chachamim tell us that we have to strive to be like the matzah and not the chametz. Concerning matzah, there's always something happening to it. It's always being worked on. Everybody's moving in order to get the matzah done as quickly as possible. Very much like life. Life is full of limitless potential, and we have to continue to strive and work on reaching that potential. We should never be satisfied or happy with the status quo concerning ourselves, especially our spiritual selves. That's the problem that many of us have. We've become comfortable with ourselves, and we believe that we've reached a certain level of religious observance and spirituality, and we're happy with that. Some of us think that we're okay exactly where we are. But that's the attitude of the chametz, where we put the chametz on the counter and we just leave it there, we just let it stay there. But our rabbis tell us that we have to be like the matzah, where we're actively working on ourselves in order to improve and become better. That's something actually that we learn from a pasuk in Zechariah HaNavi alav shalom that says, "V'natati lecha mehalchim ben ha'omdim ha'ele," and I will give you ones who walk among these who stand. Who are these omdim? Chachamim say that the omdim are the malachim, the angels. Malachim are called omdim. Why are they called omdim? Because angels do not grow in levels of spirituality. They're created on a certain level and they remain on that level. They are omdim, they don't go anywhere. But the pasuk says, "V'natati lecha mehalchim ben ha'omdim ha'ele." Mehalech comes from the word holech, which means to move, to walk. Human beings are called mehalchim, the ones who walk. And that's the basic difference between a man and an angel. Man has the ability to climb on the ladder of potential step after step in order to reach greatness. And that's because he's constantly moving. He's always in the process of being a holech. Rabbi Berachi alav shalom quotes a midrash that compares two great men, Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom and Noach. And Rabbi Berachi points out that in the beginning of his career, Noach is called an ish tzaddik. But at the end of his life, the Torah calls him Noach ish ha'adamah. Noach went from being called a righteous man to being called the man of the earth. So it seems that there was a lapse in Noach's elevation, and he became an ish ha'adamah. Whereas Moshe Rabbeinu initially began his career being called an ish mitzri. And at the end of his life, in the last parasha of the entire Torah, what does it say about him? Vezot ha'beracha asher berach Moshe ish ha'elokim. And this is the blessing with which Moshe, the man of God, blessed. At the end of his life, he's called the man of God, which means Moshe Rabbeinu was constantly traveling upward in levels of spirituality. He elevated himself from an ish mitzri to an ish ha'elokim. That's the message, ladies. That's the message. We always have to be traveling northbound. We always have to be ascending upwards. Now, some of us travel slower than others, but we all have to ask ourselves, which direction are we heading in? Do we see ourselves growing spiritually from one year to the next? Is that our aspiration, that we want to grow? Or is it possible that in a year from now, we're going to be in the same place we were last year? Or chaz v'shalom, even further away? And Chachamim tell us that this is how we have to consider our spiritual existence. We have to ask ourselves the following. Based on our current circumstance, based on the environment that we're in, based on the people who surround us, will it lead us to a growth in areas of Yahadut, to an elevation of our neshama, to more ruchaniyut, to more spirituality? Or are we set up in such a way that it might just lead to a spiritual downfall? Our job is to elevate ourselves from the person we are today and strive upwards towards the potential that exists inside of us to be an ish ha'elokim. And we do have that ability. We do. The Rambam even tells us that we do, alav shalom. And Ilchot Shuvah, what does he say? Kol adam ra'ui lihiyot tzaddik ke Moshe Rabbeinu. Every person is worthy enough to become as righteous as Moshe Rabbeinu. Or the opposite, chaz v'shalom, or rasha ke Yerovam ben Nevat. You can also choose to be an evildoer like the terrible Yerovam ben Nevat. So don't be fooled, ladies. The Satan wants you to think that you're worth nothing, that you'll achieve nothing. He wants you to feel you have no real potential. But the Rambam says this is far from the truth. You could be as great as Moshe Rabbeinu if you will it from yourself. And if the Rambam is saying this, you realize how much potential exists inside of you. Therefore, you can't be passive when it concerns your life. You have to be like the Matzah, active and moving and doing, which means that there's no limit to how high you could reach and how much you could achieve. Therefore, we should never sell ourselves short. We should never be happy with the levels that we're on spiritually. I'm going to give you an example from the Torah itself. If you remember, ladies, when Yaakov Avinu alav hashalom had his famous dream in the wilderness, the pasuk in Sefer Bereshit says that he saw a sulam mutzav arza. He saw a ladder that was set up on the ground, verosho magia hashamayma, and the top of the ladder reached the heavens. And what else did he see? Umalachei Elokim olim veyordim. He saw angels of God that were ascending and descending this ladder. The ladder is obviously referring to the ladder of spirituality. There were angels going up the ladder and down the ladder. And the Gaon of Vilna alav hashalom points out a very important musar about this ladder. He says that most people think that when it concerns spirituality, there are three directions they could be moving in. You're either moving up, moving down, or you're in a state of neutrality. You're in neutral. People think, he says, that there are those who are traveling north, that there are those who are traveling south, and those who are in park and not going anywhere. But the Gaon of Vilna says, that's a mistake. That's a mistake. Because in reality, he says, there are only two directions you could be heading in life when it concerns your ruchaniyut. He says you're either going up or you're going down. Either you are olim or you are yordim. In Yahadut, he says there is no such thing as being in neutral. He claims that's just impossible. According to the Gaon of Vilna, if you are in neutral, if you're parked on the side of the road, it means you're actually going down the ladder of spirituality. And I'll explain it to you with a mashal so you can better understand this. Ladies, imagine being on an airplane that has 4 engines. Those engines propel the airplane to ascend higher and higher in the sky. And those engines keep that airplane flying steady. But what would happen if those engines shut down? What would happen? The airplane would fall. We don't say that if those engines fail, the plane just won't ascend any higher. It's just going to remain in the altitude that it's currently at. No, we don't say that. Not only will the plane not ascend any higher, it's going to fall. Gravity is going to pull that plane down. It also doesn't happen that when all the engines fail, that we say, no problem, so all the 4 engines failed, the airplane is just going to continue to glide across the sky until we get to our destination. We don't say that either. When those engines are out, the plane falls. The same is true with life. When a person is making inroads in religion, working on elevating himself and growing, he is going to succeed. That's the engine that propels him to ascend in levels of spirituality. But if a person is not moving, he may not get to any productive place. He might not reach his destination, or worse than that. Just like the airplane, he might fall, chaz v'shalom. So Chachamim tell us that part of not moving and not doing and not being active, that has to do with the nature of man, which is to be lazy. That's our nature, to be lazy. How is it our nature, and why is it our nature? We're told that because we're created from the element that is the laziest. Which element are we created with? We were created from the afar ha'adama, the earth itself. And we're told, Ki afar ata, you are dust, vela afar tashuv, and we're going to return to that dust. You know what the afar does all day long? You know what the afar does all day long? It just sits there doing nothing. It rests and it sleeps on the bed of the earth. Afar is dormant. And human beings are made from the dust of the earth. So it's our nature not to want to activate ourselves and move and achieve something. Therefore, if a person feels happy with the level that he's holding it in life, that in itself is a type of spiritual decline, says the Gaon of Vilna. So imagine for a second, life is like this electric escalator that's going down. You know those escalators? As you're running up that downward escalator, if you stop, oh, you're gonna go down. That's why each of us has to be an active player when it involves religious growth. And that's how the Gaon of Vilna explains the following pasuk in Sefer Mishlei, which was written by the wise Shlomo HaMelech Alav Shalom, that states, Orach Chaim, the way of life, Lemalam lemaskil, it's more than you could possibly imagine. You know what this means? It means that the things you could accomplish in spirituality is lemala lemaskil. It's limitless. It's more than you could possibly ever envision. And the reason why Akadosh Baruch Hu wants you to climb as high as you could possibly climb in levels of Ruchaniyut is because Akadosh Baruch Hu is trying to keep you away from the depths. That's the end of the pasuk. Lema'an sur mishol mata, which means that elevating yourself doesn't only benefit you in reaching high levels of spirituality, but it also stops you from descending into the depths of nothingness, into the world of inactivity. Rav Tzadok Cohen, alav shalom, makes a very fascinating, interesting observation. He says, and some of you might know this already, but he says that the world is round. You know the world is round, right? You know the world is round. The world is round. And that shape is a common shape in the creation, he says. The sun is round, the moon is round. When you look at the mountain from the top, you see it has a round base. The eyes are round, the head is round. Almost everything in creation has a round shape. Why round and not square? Or any other shape, triangle, rectangle. What does this round shape represent? Rav Tzadok explains that a ball, which is also round, when you put that ball on a table, just put it down, you'll notice that it begins to move. A ball does not remain steady. A ball, you put it, it's always turning. But a square isn't like that. When you put a square down on a table, it remains still and firmly in its place. Same is true with a triangle. The same is true with a rectangle. They all have a base that keeps it locked into place. A round ball has no base. A ball is constantly moving like the world. The world is constantly turning. And not only is it turning this way, it's also turning, rotating around the sun. And that's the message of creation. Says Rav Tzadok, you have to be like a kadur. You have to be like the round shape of the world, which means you always have to be moving and active. Try to attend the next shiur. Try to engage in the next mitzvah, in the next project. Should try not to be like the dough of the Chametz that just sits there and waits for somebody to deal with it. Your life has to be as active as a matzah bakery, where everybody is moving and running and doing and actively involved in ensuring that the matzah does not become chametz. Actually, we know that the Rabbanim compare chametz to the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is the leaven inside of us that tries to cause us to remain stagnant. The Yetzer Hara prevents us from moving. But in Yahadut, you always have to keep moving up the next madrega. You cannot allow yourselves to sit still. You always have to be in motion. As a matter of fact, the Ari HaKadosh Alav Shalom says that the night before the 14th of Nisan, which we know is Erev Chag, what do? He says, Botkim et hachametz. We search the house for chametz. We search for traces of the Yetzer Hara, and we have to introspect and make a decision to do away with that part of us that keeps us stationary. And after we're done with the search, he says, and we think that we've collected all the chametz and we've done away with it, the Ari says that's when the most important part of the bdikat chametz has to be completed. And that's the searching of your heart. You have to ask yourselves, is there any chametz left in my heart? Is there any trace of that yetzer that keeps me in the same place I was yesterday, last week, last month, last year? Am I still at a standstill of life, or am I trying to move forward? Ladies, Pesach is a chag where the entire time period is packed with mitzvot that are keeping you moving and active. It's a holiday that's keeping you busy and energetic. That's the lesson of this chag, that no matter what we've accomplished, there's still more we can do, more to conquer, more we can strive to achieve, more we can be. Chafetz Chaim Alav Shalom writes a mashal about a businessman who took his horse and carriage, and he warned the driver. He says, look, don't fall asleep, okay? And sure enough, at some point on the journey, the driver fell asleep at the reins, and the horses began to veer off the path. And as a result, the carriage went into a ditch and almost crashed into a tree. And the businessman stuck his head out the window of the carriage, and he started to yell at the driver. He says, hey, what's going on over here? Wake up! I told you not to fall asleep. And the driver all of a sudden wakes up and he says, what's going on? Oh my gosh, I can't believe I fell asleep like this. But I don't understand these horses. How did they veer off the path like this? They know the road well enough that they shouldn't have veered off the path. And the businessman turns to this wagon driver and he says, you tipesh. Do you not have any understanding of life? A horse is only in control as long as the driver is holding the reins. Once the reins are released and the horse is left on his own, he's bound to veer off the path and take a wrong turn. That's the mashal of the Chafetz Chaim. He says, if a person isn't going to work at becoming better spiritually, he might become worse. Because the magnet of this world will pull him down. And if human beings are not going to take hold of the reins of their own life, they'll find themselves veering off the path into the wrong direction. The wrong direction, he says, is olam hazeh. That's the wrong direction, with all its pitfalls and all its nisyonot. So we have to try to be active participants of our own spiritual elevation and direct ourselves. Otherwise, it's like that horse that doesn't have a driver to steer him in the right direction. There was a great rabbi named Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, alav shalom. I'm sure you've heard of him. Rabbi Yochanan had 5 students. Who were they? Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos, Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, Rabbi Shimon ben Netanel, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, alehem shalom. These are famous Rabbanim, some of them were Tanaim, that we read about in the Mishnayot of Pirkei Avot. But what did Rabbi Yochanan say in the Mishnah about his student, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos? He says like this: Im yihiyu kol chochmei Yisrael bekaf moznayim echad. If all the sages of Israel were on one side of a scale, ve'Eliezer ben Horkonos bekaf shniya, and if Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos was on the other side of the scale, machriya et kulam, he would outweigh them all. Wow. Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos must have been a giant in Torah if that's what his own rabbi said about him. Agreed? But guess what? Another great rabbi, Abba Shaul alav shalom, said something else. He said, if all the sages of Israel and Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos were on one side of the scale, while Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach was on the other side of the scale, Haya machriya et kulam, he would outweigh them all. Oh, look at this, look at this. Could you imagine the level of Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach, that he outweighs them all, including Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos? You imagine that? Why am I telling you this? Because after the death of his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, at his old age, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach decided to move to a place called Damasit. His wife urged him to move to this place. She wanted very much to be in this place. This place was very scenic. The Gemara describes it as it was like a resort area. There were beautiful lakes and nice streams. It was a very comfortable place where one could relax and retire at an elderly age, says the Gemara. Anyhow, when Rosh Chodesh Nisan rolled around on the calendar, Rabbi Eliezer was called up for an aliyah in shul over there, and he was given the kavod to read the famous words of the Parashat HaChodesh, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. And instead of saying the words HaChodesh hazeh lachem, he made a mistake in front of everybody, and he said the words HaCheresh haya libam. Their hearts were deaf. Oops. What happened to Rabbi Eliezer? This was a Gaon in Torah, a leading rabbi of the generation. Rabbi Yochanan said about him, his own rabbi said about him, fortunate are you, Avraham Avinu, to have such a successor who descended from you, Rabbi Eliezer. How could Rabbi Eliezer make such a huge mistake like this and read the words incorrectly from the Torah? HaChodesh hazeh lachem became HaCheresh haya libam. How did this happen? The Mefarshim explained that he forgot all of his learning. Could you imagine this? He forgot the Torah. Why did that happen to him? You know why it happened to him? You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you. The rabbis tell us it happened to him because he moved to a place where, although the scenery was nice, there was barely any real Torah over there. So what happened to him? He became lax about his learning, about his chevrutot. He wasn't as diligent. The Gemara says he kiviyachol put his neshama in park for a few years. He felt that after all these years of learning and sacrificing myself for Torah, he deserved a little bit of a break, a little bit of a vacation. Says the Gemara, it's because of that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent him a very powerful message where he made a mistake in shul in front of the whole kahal and said the words Hacheresh haya libam. You know what Hashem's message to Rabbi Eliezer was? Your heart became deaf and your mind became closed. Rabbi Eliezer, how did you forget the words of Shlomo HaMelech, who wrote in Sifrei Mishle, Im ta'azveni yom, if you leave my Torah for one day, yomayim azveka, the Torah will leave you for two. All your years of learning, Rabbi Eliezer, could be forgotten in a matter of a few months. Because when you're not actively involved in elevating yourself spiritually, there is going to be a yeridah. And you cannot expect anything else to happen. And it can happen, even to a great man such as you, Rabbi Eliezer. Such a great man fell in levels of his ruchaniyut because he stopped to rest. To rest from ruchaniyut. He wanted to rejuvenate, he wanted to relax. But when he did that, when he put himself in park, many things changed for him. Many things changed for him. The Gemara says that the Yetzer Hara got the best of him, and ultimately, the way he used to address his Torah learning, the way he used to diligently and with great effort study and give great consideration to his ruchaniyut, now fell to the wayside. And eventually, and sadly, the Torah left him. Obviously, ladies, we're talking about spiritual elevation. We're not talking about when a person needs a day or two to strengthen himself physically and rejuvenate. We're not talking about that. We're referring to people who remain parked for too long, which is not healthy for them. But I'm wondering, ladies, when Rabbi Yochanan praised Rabbi Eliezer and he said, Ashrecha Avraham Avinu sheyatza zo mechalatzecha. Why was Avraham Avinu mentioned and not the other forefathers? Why not Ashrecha Yitzchak? Why not Ashrecha Yaakov? Or better yet, why not Ashrei Yoladetecha? Fortunate is the one who gave birth to you. Why only mention Avraham Avinu alav shalom? Ladies, if you remember, on the day of the Akedah, Avraham had to take his only son, who was 37 years old at that time, and place him on the Mizbeach. Right before he was about to bring him up as an olah, and had the knife in his hand, ready to slaughter his son, a heavenly voice was heard saying, Avraham, Avraham, Al tishlach yadcha el hana'ar. Do not touch this young lad. Ve'al ta'aslo me'uma. Do not blemish him in any way. And Baruch Hashem, what do we know? Yitzchak was saved from being brought up as an olah. Ladies, I ask you, think about what I'm about to tell you. I ask you, after such an emotionally exhausting day, after such a traumatic experience, what do you think that Yitzchak should do right after that? What do you think he should do from that? Right after that, what do you think he should do? We might think that he should go home, take a break, and relax from this very tense and stressing event. After all, it's not every day that a person is put on an altar with a knife to his neck, about to be slaughtered by his own father yet, but then is saved at the last minute, berachamei shamayim. It doesn't happen every day. That is a traumatic event. Logic would tell us, after such a terribly traumatic event, Yitzchak would need therapy and a 2-week vacation just to clear his mind from what just transpired and who it transpired with. Think about it. Some of us take a day off from work because we got a flu shot and our arm hurts and we need a day off. And here, Yitzchak was put on the mizbeach by his own father and was almost slaughtered. Shouldn't he take a well-deserved break? Shouldn't he go on vacation for a little while? We would certainly think so. But you know what happened? You know what the Torah Kedosha says? That Avraham Avinu came back from the Akedah alone. Where was Yitzchak? Chachamim tell us that Avraham dropped him off at Yeshivat Shem Ve'ever on the way home. What? You drop him off in the yeshiva? Is this normal? I mean, after this horrible event that could leave your son emotionally scarred for life, you drop him off in the yeshiva? I mean, don't you think he needs a little pause, a little rest, a little break from the event that just happened? No. Chachamim tell us the way in which the tzaddikim functioned was that they never took a break from the things in life they considered to be important. And for them, what was most important was aliyah ruchanit, a spiritual elevation. They were always looking for ways to climb another step higher in the ladder of spirituality, to rise mechail el chail. And you know why they felt that it has to be this way? Why does it have to be this way? Because when you're in the groove of something, when there's a momentum, when there's an energy that's flowing, you don't want to destroy it by putting yourself in park for too long. Chachamim tell us the fact that we stop for too long, and now we pick up the pieces and we go again. And then we stop again for too long, and again we pick up the pieces and again we stop for too long. That leads to a spiritual decline. And the rabbis give us an example of this musar with a mashal of a person who's trying to heat up some water in order to warm up his body from the cold. What does that person do? He puts the water on the fire in a kettle, and just as the water is about to get hot, he takes it off the fire and the water cools. And he does it again. He puts the water on the fire, and just as the water is about to get hot, boom, once again he removes it from the flame. Say the Rabbanim, This man isn't allowing the water to boil. And then he wonders why the water is cool and unpleasant. The tzaddikim never took a break from spirituality, from their responsibilities, from people, from the calling of life. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan was telling his Talmid, Rabbi Eliezer ben Arach. He said, Avraham Avinu would be very proud of you because so far you're not stopping. En letzadikim menucha ba'olam hazeh. You have to forge on if you want the fire of the love that you feel for Torah to keep burning inside of you. Otherwise, it's going to dwindle and fade into oblivion. Your gift, Rabbi Eliezer, is that right now you have the attitude of the Matzah. You keep moving towards a positive place. But be careful that you shouldn't get caught in the trap of staying parked spiritually. Sadly, that's exactly what happened with Rabbi Eliezer. He put his neshama in park for too long in order to take a breather from all the years of the intensity of learning. Which means that at the end of his life, say the Chachamim, he adapted the attitude of the Chametz. He took too long for a break from this intensity of the world of Torah. And sadly, the Gemara says, eventually, because he took too long of that break, the Torah left him. There's a story told about the great Rabbi Meir of Premishlan, alav shalom, who was riding in the carriage with his son-in-law on a very dangerous mountain. Suddenly the horses got a little scared from something and they began to run loose, and that posed a great threat because of all the ditches and the overhangs on that mountain. So the son-in-law was so scared that he turned to his father-in-law and he says, Rabbi, maybe we should just jump off the carriage. We might suffer a couple of bruises because we jumped off, but at least we'll save ourselves from falling off the mountain altogether. So the Rebbe looked at him with great confidence and he says, take the reins of the horse and guide them, and you're going to see that everything will be okay. The son-in-law cannot understand this, but the Rebbe says, so he did. With all the pachad that he felt, he slowly maneuvered his way to the front of the carriage, took the reins to guide the horses, and it wasn't easy at all because the horses were wild. But with great effort, he managed to steer the horses towards a rest stop. Once things were calm, he told his father-in-law, Rebbe, Baruch Hashem, we're safe. You were right. We're okay. And as they're enjoying this moment of security and safety and rest and relaxation, one of the horses took a few steps forward and crash, bang! It fell into this massive ditch and took with it the entire carriage and all their belongings. So the Rebbe turned to his son-in-law and he said, you see what just happened? That's the Yetzer Hara. This is the Satan. Do you understand the Musar Haskel that God just taught us over here? Hashem was teaching us that as long as we're the ones controlling and guiding the Yetzer Hara, we're less likely to fall. But once we stop, once we take a break and let go of the reins, crash, bang, the Yetzer Hara takes over and leads you downward into a huge pit that you might not be able to climb out of. What a lesson of life this is, ladies. Think about it, think about it. Imagine if the women who work diligently in the matzah bakery would say, I was so tired, we really need a break. And then they proceed to take a 5-minute rest while the clock is ticking. You know what would happen if they did that? You know what would happen? We'd all be eating Chametz on Pesach, and we'd be guilty of eating it b'shogeg and possibly suffer the punishment of karet. Now these women, they don't understand why. They're screaming that, what do you mean? It's not fair. Magia lanu. We've been here since 6 o'clock in the morning, working for so many hours. Don't we deserve to take a break for a few minutes? It was just 5 minutes. For you it was 5 minutes. For you it was 5 minutes. For the rest of the community, it's chametz and all the other penalties that go along with it. Chachamim say that is exactly what happens when we don't strive to climb up the madrega of ruchaniut. That's what happens when we decide to put the car in park for too long. In Yahadut, we have to make sure that we are always moving. And when we're moving, that we're moving north and not south. But ultimately, it all depends on your ratzon. Where there's a will, there is a way. En hadavar omed bifnei haratzon. There is nothing that can stand in the way of your will. But you have to want. You have to want. When a person has the inner desire to achieve something, when there's something that drives him forward, he'll suddenly have this surge of energy that's almost miraculous, and he will achieve his goal. When you have the ratzon, you could accomplish the impossible. But when you give up, when you lose that ratzon, that's when you know you're not in a good place. That's when you realize you might not be able to conquer this battle of life or defeat the Yetzer Hara. We all need a motivation and an incentive that feeds our ratzon. Without it, we lose hope. We lose tikva. Now, I'll give you an example of this. There's an interesting Gemara of Baba Metzia that tells us of a case. Listen to this one, ladies. You have to be on your tippy toes for this one. Where somebody hired a shepherd to tend his sheep. But the shepherd left the flock unattended for a few minutes. And as a result, a wolf came along and ate one of the sheep. What do we do? What do we do in such a case? The Gemara concludes that the shepherd is exempt from paying the owner for the loss of that one sheep. But why? I mean, he left the flock unattended, and because of that, the wolf ate the sheep. Shouldn't it be his responsibility to pay the owner back for the loss of that sheep? The Gemara says no. No. He's not obligated to pay him back for the loss. Why? And the Gemara says something very interesting. It says, well, because even if that shepherd was there when the wolf came along, it doesn't mean the wolf wouldn't have succeeded in devouring that sheep, which means that whether or not the shepherd was there, the wolf may just have succeeded in eating that sheep. I don't understand this. I'm not the only one who doesn't understand this. How do we understand this? It seems a little strange. And even the Chachamim and the Gemara have a question on this case. They ask, what do you mean, even if he was there, the wolf may have succeeded in devouring the sheep? Even if he was there, how's that possible? His job is to tend the flock. How is it possible, even if he was there, the wolf may have eaten the sheep? After all, they say, what does it say in Sefer Shmuel about David HaMelech alav shalom, who was a shepherd? What does it say? The pasuk there says, Gam et ha'ari, gam hadov, hika avdecha. Both the lion and the bear has your bondsman slain. David HaMelech, says the Gemara, was able to slay a lion and a bear while protecting the herd. How was he able to do that? Chachamim explain, well, just by seeing that there's a threat to the flock, just the mere fact that the shepherd sees a wolf approaching, that motivates him to gather the strength necessary to chase the wolf away, because he knows that otherwise that poor sheep is going to be devoured by the wolf. Says the Gemara, it must be therefore that our shepherd, in the case of the Gemara, didn't have enough strength. That's why whether or not the wolf would have come, it may have devoured the sheep. He probably didn't have enough strength. Okay. So where should this shepherd's strength come from? How does one gather the koach to respond? And the Chachamim conclude that the strength comes from your ratzon. The strength comes from a sincere desire, from the urge to want to do something, from the will that still exists within you. And this way of thinking isn't just related to religious matters. Chachamim tell us that's something we should all work on when it concerns our private life. If you have the ratzon in any given area of your life, you will succeed. If you have a desire for your marriage to survive, it can. If you want to get along with your nasty neighbor, you can make that happen. If you want to become successful in any business venture, you will accomplish. If you want to keep your friendships alive, it will happen. If you want to get along with your children or your grandchildren or whoever it is, you will make it happen. Because if it's the ratzon that drives you, there's a limitless amount of potential that you could access and bring to life. But once the ratzon dwindles, once your will becomes ayef, tired, once you put yourself in park for too long, most likely there will not be a positive result. I'm going to end with this idea, ladies. There's an interesting midrash where Rabbi Natan alav shalom tells us the strategy that the Jews used to do battle against Midian and how they defeated them. What was their strategy? I'm going to have some show and tell. They surrounded the enemy on 3 sides. You see this? You see this? They surrounded the enemy on 3 sides, but they left the 4th side open. And the Rabbanim ask, why did they leave this 4th side open? Why not do this? You see this? Why not box in the enemy on all 4 sides so that they have no way to escape, so that they're ensnared and trapped? Why not do this? You know why? Tremendous chidush. Because if you box him in, he's going to feel as if he has no option, as if he has no choice, as if he's trapped. And that feeling of feeling trapped is going to push him to save himself somehow. The knowledge that he's trapped might just fuel his energy, not only to save himself, but to defeat his opponent. So the Jews left the fourth side open so that the Midianim will think they have an escape route, just in case they're losing the battle, and knowing that they have a way out will make their energy and stamina decrease automatically. I have a way out, I have a way out. And when that energy is lessened, even if it's slightly, that's how they're going to be defeated. That's how they're going to be defeated. As a matter of fact, from this episode of the battle against Midian, the Rambam concludes a halakha concerning how we, the Jews, should do battle against the enemy. And he writes, when you go out to war, never box in your enemy. Because even if you might be physically stronger than him, if he's boxed in and he sees that he has no way out, his strength is going to be stimulated and he could become very dangerous. Because when he's stimulated, it means his ratzon is now very strong. And when the ratzon is very strong, you could do the impossible. You could do the impossible. As a matter of fact, let me just give you a cute case that the Gemara tells us that in certain cases, lemashal, where two people are fighting over something physically. For example, if two people are fighting over a talit, and one person is pulling the talit towards him, it's my talit, while the other person is pulling the talit, it's my talit. How do you rule over such a case? You're not going to cut the talit in half. Who gets that talit at the end of the day? The Gemara says, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we follow a general rule. What's the general rule? The general rule is the stronger one gets the talit. What do you mean the stronger one gets the talit? That's a very strange way of determining an outcome. We decide whose talit it is based on a person's strength. What happened to the deliberations of the Beddin? What about considering the halakha? No. Whoever flexes the biggest muscles and manages to pull the talit to his side wins the talit. Yofi. What? Well, how do we understand this? So one of the Mefarshim explains this ruling of the Gemara, and he says, you know where it comes from? It comes from the fact that if the talit really belongs to you, you will muster up all the strength you have inside of you to pull that talit to your side. If you have the ratzon because it's your talit, you're going to have a ratzon. If you're the stronger one in this tug of war, that's an indication that the talit is yours. Because even a weak person would find the inner strength to take back what truly belongs to him. The fact that you're pulling that talit to your side with all the strength that you have inside of you demonstrates your ratzon to retrieve it to you. Wow, what a lesson of life this is. Because what it's telling us is how much koach is embedded within you that could propel you forward and into action and to an elevated place. If you have ratzon and if you believe that spirituality belongs to you, don't limit yourself. Don't tell yourself that you don't have the ability, that you don't have the tools, that you won't succeed. These are paralyzing words, ladies. Those words are going to incapacitate you. They're going to tempt you to quit right before you're able to succeed. You have the ability to exceed all your potentials. Sometimes in life, you might not feel ready to do something. And all of a sudden Hashem places this nisayon in front of you, not so you could put yourself in park and ride out the storm. No. Think of the times where we all say this. We say right now. We say right now, in this moment now, I feel as if, I don't know if I could do this. I just don't know. I don't know if I could do this. I'm afraid I'm not going to succeed. But then, suddenly, your ratzon to try pushes you through that moment, and suddenly, instead of giving yourself a break, you have a breakthrough, and you do the impossible, and you succeed. So I saw a nice quote that really sums up what we've been learning tonight. Listen to these words. Get going. Move forward. Aim high. Plan a takeoff. Don't just sit on the runway and hope someone will come along and push the airplane. It simply won't happen. Change your attitude and gain some altitude. Believe me, you'll love it up there. Isn't that amazing? I like that quote. In other words, you have to find ways to accelerate your ratzon because your destiny is waiting for you. So I want to read to you the words that Anne Frank, alaiha shalom, wrote in her diary as she was living the horrors of the Holocaust. Listen to these words that she wrote. Everyone has inside of them a piece of good news. The good news is you don't know how great you can be, how much you can love, what you can accomplish, and what your potential is. Wow. Anne Frank, in the middle of a war, silent in a room, not knowing if she'll live or die, writes these words. There's good news. The good news is you could do anything. Incredible. Your potential, ladies, is that of Matzah. Active, purposeful, energetic, spirited. You shouldn't live with spiritual limitations. You should try to have higher aspirations. Don't write yourselves off and decide, I'm never going to succeed. I don't have it in me. I'm not strong enough. I'm not capable enough. Such thoughts are going to stunt your growth, and you're going to miss the opportunity to overcome a nisayon that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is putting right there in front of you. And I do believe you could leap tall buildings in a single bound if you have the ratzon. You have superhuman strength when you have the ratzon. You're the real Wonder Woman, by the way. Not the Linda Carter or Gal Gadot or any of these actresses. No, you're the Wonder Woman. You know why? Because you create wonders, niflaot, when your will is strong. When you have that ratzon, it prompts you to move. It prompts you to be active and to grow. It might not be easy, but it's going to be worth it. But if you're going to remain stagnant, waiting, parked, you become leavened. You become Chametz. Remember that life is very much like riding a bicycle. You're not going to fall off unless you stop pedaling. Remember that as you're eating your matzot on Pesach. Remember this lesson. Remember as you're eating the matzah that if anybody in the matzah bakery stopped pedaling, stopped moving, even if it's just for a few minutes, the matzot you're eating on Pesach would be chametz. Remember that your spiritual existence is like a matzah. It's endless work and preparation towards a place of elevation. Try not to forget what you're doing now before Pesach. You're cleaning your homes. You're getting rid of all the chametz. You're going to burn the chametz. And hopefully these actions are ridding your heart of the yeast that's in the dough. That yetzer hara that's keeping you stunted and parked and immobile. I want to wish you a chodesh tov, chodesh mevorach, chodesh of tremendous nisim, yehi ratzon milifnei Avinu shebashamayim, that the lessons of this shiur should help you to gather the strength to rise above yourselves, to keep going, to stimulate your being so that you could not just succeed in fulfilling your potential, but experience the incredible miracles that are going to be enacted and triggered in the zchut of you not giving up, in the zchut of you activating your neshama and revitalizing yourselves. Don't forget the Chag we're about to celebrate. It's filled with ma'asim, with actions, and with many opportunities. And Be'ezrat Hashem, adapting the attitude of the matzah will result in a miraculous Yeshua, in a miraculous redemption. You should have a Shavua Tov, a Chodesh Tov, and a Chag Sameach. Amen Ken, Yehi Ratzon.